Hi everybody, welcome back to Human Anatomy and Physiology Biology 231 L at Clackamas Community College. I'm Christina Wallace, and today we're going to talk about the appendicular skeleton. We talked about the axial skeleton last week. So we're going to talk about our appendages and all of those bones, and then we're also going to talk about joint classifications and body movements today. All right, let's start out at our lab instructions. So this is a shorter lab. Thank goodness for you guys, a shorter lab. And I just want to draw your attention to a couple of things. All right, so once again, we're going to be learning the individual names of bones, but then we're going to also be learning a bunch of bone markings, if you remember. And so I just want to draw your attention to these bone markings that I've drawn. So remember that projections are things that stick out from the body of a bone. Articulations are places where the bones rub together during movement, and it's usually a shiny surface of some sort. And then depressions and openings are literal holes in the bones where blood vessels and nerves can pass, and also curves, or depressions where a muscle will live. And we'll definitely see those on the pelvis and scapula for sure. And so I just kind of wanted to remind you of the things that we've already seen from your exercise 9. So when we first introduced exercise 9, we learned these things right here. I have them all highlighted there. And the colors that you see, projections are yellow, articulations are kind of pink, and depressions and openings are orange. That pattern will also hold onto your lab report, and you'll see that in a minute. But so we've learned 3 different kinds of projections in our first lab. So a tuberosity, remember, was a roughened, raised area. And then the trochanter was specifically on the femur, remember, like 2 really big knobby projections on the femur, and the femur is the only place you see a trochanter. And then spine is kind of a thin raised ridge of some sort, and we'll definitely see a spine on our scapula. And then in exercise 9, we learned a couple of articulations. And so we learned the head. So we saw the head of the femur, which was the rounded knob that articulates with the socket. It's the head is the ball of a ball and socket joint. And we have a couple of those in our body. And then a facet, remember, just like a facet on a cut gem is a shiny surface on one of the angles. We saw facets on our vertebrae, like the flat shiny spots where the vertebrae rub together are called facets. And then we also, in depressions and openings, we saw a couple of those in exercise 9. So we saw fossa, which is kind of a shallow depression, and a foramen, or foramina, plural, are literal holes in the bones for things to pass through the bones. So we've seen all of those before. And then I've added some vocabulary here: process, tubercle, line, and epicondyle. These are things we're going to see in our appendicular skeleton. Notice that epicondyle is a projection, but condyle is an articulation. So the condyle is the flat, shiny surface of an epicondyle. Epicondyle is the sticky outy bump that the flat, shiny surface of the condyle kind of sits on the articular surface of. And then we have one more depression or opening. We have a fovea, which is just a tiny little depression. And you'll see one called fovea capitis on the femur that is on the head of the femur. So let's just walk through your lab report a little bit. So here we are at lab report number 10. I've just, again, reminded you about our bone markings that you kind of need to know, and you'll start to see some of my highlighting that will happen. Okay. So appendicular skeleton, we're just going to start talking about bones, and we're going to start with the arm. So we start with the shoulder girdle and the upper extremity. And so going through your lab book, these are all pretty straightforward. The bones of the pectoral girdle and upper limb pretty much start at lab manual page 144 and continue on for a few pages, so you shouldn't have any trouble. Remember to always go back to those blue tables of bones and look for those important markings and the description. So when you're looking through a depression on a scapula that articulates with the humerus, you might be able to go to the tables and kind of look for those keywords. And so I'm just you don't have to do this, but I just went through your lab and picked out some of the words that kind of indicate one of those projections, articulations, or depressions and openings. And I went through and color-coded stuff. It might be useful for you guys to do this on your paper labs. It's up to you. All right, so this is honestly just kind of going through. You have one bone of your upper arm, your brachial region, and then you have two bones of your forearm. And so one of those, the lateral bone, is on the thumb side. And so I always remember, like, if you give a thumbs up, it means something's really rad. Thumbs up is rad. That indicates the radius. And so in anatomical position, your thumb points away from your midline. And so the lateral bone of your forearm is your radius. And that's just a good way to remember that bone. All right, so you're walking, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Just kind of try to find the bone that fits with these descriptions. And so on the rounded knob of the humerus that articulates with the radius, knob is not particularly a word that is on our list as a named feature, but you are looking for something that articulates. And so you're looking in the joint area of that bone. So check out the pictures and see which bone talks to the lateral bone of your forearm. Process, remember processes are things, a process is one of the new flavors of projection that we learned. So it's just kind of a sticky outy thing that sometimes will have a facet on it, sometimes doesn't. And here we have condyle. So this is the first time you've seen a condyle. And those are knuckle-like, like if you can imagine your knuckles sitting on a table, the flesh of your fingers that's touching the table would be the condyle. And so part of your condyle is articulating with your ulna. Just look at the distal end of your humerus to try to find that. Depressions, articulations, and again, so we're going on. Here's your scapula bone. The video does a great job of this, so let's go take a look at that. So down at the bottom of your lab instructions, your online instructions, there are some videos. And so here is a great scapula video that'll walk you through every piece of the architecture. And then the scapula, pelvis, and femur, all three of these videos are done by the same person. And they're great videos. Really awesome. The upper limb in general, all of these are good videos. The upper limb, arm bones is kind of a dorky video, but it is informative. So just look at your videos. They all go through perfect descriptions of all the pieces, parts that you need to know. So back to our lab report. Again, I've just kind of gone through and highlighted the things that are sticky outy in yellow, and then depressions and openings were orange. And so this is going to be all of your pelvic girdle and lower extremity. So how your pelvic bones come together. The pelvic bone video describes this really well. So this first question here has 3 blanks in it. 1, 2, 3. And so you're trying to get the 3 things that come together to form your coxal bone. So your coxal bone or your hip bone is actually 3 bones in utero, and they fuse together to form 1 bone. And so that's trying to get to the pieces parts. And this is really important because the names of the pelvic features are going to relate to what specific bone of origin they are on. So you're going to have both an ischioiliac spine, and that's going to have to do with which of these bones is the feature on, and the video does a great job of explaining that. So just a word about your ankles. So your lower leg bones, you have a medial lower leg bone and a lateral lower leg bone. The lateral lower leg bone is the name with the L in it. Lateral fibula. Lateral fibula. When you fibuli, the fibula is the one with the L. And at the end of those bones, there is a structure called a malleolus. And you have one on both of your lower leg bones, and those form the bumps of your ankle. So when you touch your ankle and there's a bone on the outside of on the lateral side, that's a malleolus. And then on the inside of your ankle, if you palpate it, that's a malleolus. So you have a lateral one and a medial one, and they go with each of the lower leg bones. Not difficult. Okay, then again, we're looking at the pelvis and the femur, and I've gone through and done a little bit of highlighting just so, and I hope I got everything. I think I got everything. But, projections I've highlighted in yellow, and the articulations I've highlighted in that kind of pink color. And then the depressions and openings I've highlighted in orange. So that might be a useful way for you to study these things and make yourself a list. And so once again, you're just kind of learning the architecture of the bones by labeling the pieces parts. And here you can see the 3 colors of the pelvic bone or the coxal bone that all fuse together to form one bone. So the ischium is purple, the pubis or pubic bone is red, and the bone or yellow colored one is your ilium. Look for those words in, ischial ramus as compared to pubic ramus. Ischial spine as compared to iliac spine. So that gives you a bit of information about location. The next thing you have to do is compare male and female pelvises, and there is a bunch of information about this in your book. So starting on page 149, you can read all about the male and female pelvises, and then on page 152, there's a great picture. And so just get a couple of bullet points. There's 5 here, but it's unlikely I'm going to ask you 5 on a test. So just kind of think about having a couple bullet points that definitively tell you, if you're looking at a pelvis, which one is female and which one is male. And pubic arch is a really, really good marker for that. So the next part of your lab is all about articulations or joints and body movements. And so this is all exercise 11. So you'll be moving on to the next exercise in your book, and you're talking about joint classifications. And basically there's 2 kinds of major joint classifications: structural versus functional, and I'll go into a little bit about what that means. All right, so you have 2 main ways joints are classified, right? Structural classes right here is all about what kind of connective tissue do you find in the joint, what's happening between the bones that are rubbing together, and is there a joint cavity? And so one of these are all the structural classes of joints, and one of them is going to have a joint cavity. So I want you to figure out what that is. And then secondly, you have functional classes. And so over here, functional classes all have to do with how much movement is allowed by the joint. Does it not move at all? Or is it really, really movable? And so you have this kind of continuum right here of syn, ambi, di. So you have a synarthrosis or a synarthrotic joint, an ambiarthrotic joint, and a diarthrotic joint. And it's all going to be on that continuum of how much does it move. And so what are they made of? Structural. How do they move? Functional. So here we are at your lab report. And I've just pretty much reiterated those things. And so I put some notes. You're starting at page 166. That will describe kind of the two classes. So you have structural classes and functional classes. And then this first question right here, types of joints, are mainly getting you to kind of identify structural classes. Is it a cartilaginous joint, a fibrous joint, or a synovial joint? And then as you go on down, you're going to see these 3 purple highlighted words. And I draw your attention. These purple highlighted words are functional classifications. And so that's what you just saw on the previous slide. Syn, remember, ambi, and di. Now these are not in proper order, because this one should go up here, right? Syn, ambi, di. Ambi's in the middle. Ambiguous in the middle. A little bit of both, if you can imagine that. So that's functional classification. And then at the bottom of this picture, or at bottom of this page, you have a couple more classifications to do. So you have to, again, identify joints as by their functional characteristics: cartilaginous, fibrous, synovial. But then it wants to get a little more detail from you. So of these joints that are listed here, you have to figure out which ones are synovial and then give a little bit more information. And that's what the green highlighting is telling you. So a synovial joint can be uniaxial, where it's moving on just one axis of movement, like one direction. It can be biaxial, so where it can move in 2 directions, or multiaxial, like a ball and socket joint that can move in like all directions across all planes of movement. And I just want to draw your attention to this freaking fantastic chart on page 177 and 178. That is just a synopsis of every joint in the body. It just literally goes down the skeleton with colored polka dots and tells you all the information about the joint, both its structural class and its functional class. Next page just goes into a little bit more information about a synovial joint. And so you have some vocabulary to identify here. And just a reminder, structure has to do with what it's made of. Function is what it does or how it's moving. Ligaments connect bone to bone, and tendons connect muscle to bone. So just keep that in mind as you're answering these vocabulary questions and identifying stuff in the picture. And then it has a little bit of information. So there's a beautiful color-coded picture. This picture is taken directly out of your lab manual. You shouldn't have any problem identifying this stuff. And I just want to draw your attention to articular cartilage. Articular cartilage is a location. It's like a function of the cartilage. And that articular cartilage generally is hyaline. As the flavor of cartilage. Remember, we learned 3: hyaline, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. Typically, articular cartilage is hyaline, but I want you to know the difference between these terms. Articular cartilage is like, what do you find in this location? Hyaline cartilage is the answer to what specific tissue type is this? So just keep those in mind. And then your lab ends with basically some information about your big ball and socket joints. It's, easily found. You shouldn't have any problems. All right, so that is your lab for this week. Happy studying to you.